Mike Millner, welcome to the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. What's good, brother?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Dude, super excited to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you, to share your knowledge and wisdom with our listeners. You've definitely been someone that I've been looking up to for quite a while now, just through some business related stuff. And then of course, through the fitness and nutrition space. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to chat. So Mike, you have carved out a nice little kind of niche, if you will, in the health and fitness and nutrition space with respect to mindset. And so I'm curious, and I suppose this would be an opportune time to infuse some of your background information, but specifically around why is it that you have put so much focus into mindset as being the driving force behind lifestyle change?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that mindset has become a buzzword in the fitness space. And I think that a lot of coaches, unfortunately, throw it around as in they know that it's important, but they don't truly know what it means. I think you hear mindset and it's like, okay, I know that my thoughts matter. I know that my beliefs matter. I know that my relationship with food matters, but they don't actually understand the psychology of what we're trying to accomplish as coaches. It's a very nuanced and complicated situation, right? Trying to change your habits, your lifestyle, your body composition, all of those things are dynamic and nuanced and very personal. So what I learned very early on in my coaching career was that we can't treat this problem that we're facing, and the problem can be different for every individual, but anybody listening that has a problem of not feeling comfortable in their own skin, or wanting to lose 20 pounds or 100 pounds, or just wanting to feel more confident in the clothes that they're wearing, or just wanting to be a better example for their kids, whatever it is, there's something that's causing you pain. And solving that problem is an adaptive problem. It's not a technical one. And what I mean by that is a technical problem is like, I stepped on a rusty nail, I got tetanus, I need a tetanus shot, right? It's very technical. It's like, here's the prescription, now go do it. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, we've been treating nutrition, weight loss, fitness as the technical problem. Like, let me just prescribe these macros.
Well, and like a calculator based problem too. It's like, exactly, here's your X's and O's, exercise this much, eat this much or this little. And, on paper, everything should work out just fine.
Exactly. So it's like, here's your meal plan, here's your prescription, now go do it, and like, problem solved. Except that's not how humans work. We're dealing with, again, an adaptive problem. And the difference is that an easy way to understand this is anybody that has kids, that has multiple children, that they're very different in their personality, their characteristics, their nature. So if you had a situation where, let's say there was like heartbreak in the family, or you lost a pet, or there was a really difficult situation that was causing them pain, you would probably approach the conversation differently with each individual child, because of the way that they're wired, right? Their disposition as their parent, all right, for this kid, I need to maybe take a more gentle approach. And the solution of overcoming that pain is going to be very personalized. Their grieving process, how they cope with those emotions that they're dealing with. It's not just, let me write this prescription, right? You can't just hand them a playbook and say, here's how you get over this heartbreak. And that's exactly what we're dealing with when it comes to, a fitness journey, a nutrition journey, weight loss journey, whatever you want to call it. And the way that I learned that was that I tried the technical solution. I tried the meal plans. I tried the 1,200 calorie diets. I tried doing hours of cardio. I tried following what coaches were prescribing me. And it led me down a path of moving further and further away from where I actually wanted to be. So I know this is a very long-winded answer, but that's how it's good. The emphasis on mindset. And I really wanted to unpack what I mean by mindset. It's like, what is the adaptive solution for each individual, starting from like a top-down approach? How do we create behavior change that's actually sustainable? So I learned from my own journey of trying to change my own physical appearance and improve my relationship with food, with my body, with exercise, something that I had struggled with for a long portion of my life. It was, how do I get there? And I did things the technical way, and it didn't work. So I very quickly learned that I need to understand the psychology of this. And it took me away from spending so much time learning about human metabolism and nutritional science, which was like a big portion. I was like, if I know everything, if I could recite studies and all of this information, I can help all of these people. And that just wasn't happening. So I really started focusing my efforts on how do we think and how do we actually change our behavior and how do we deal with individuals who are all different and unique. And that's where you mentioned my niche of really focusing on mindset and the personality of the people that we're coaching to create this sustainable lifestyle change.
You know, it's interesting because I think, and I have this conversation a lot with guests, especially because a lot of the guests that I have been in the industry for a relatively long period of time. And I think inevitably, when you've done what we do for long enough, you realize, and perhaps when you've taken the route that most coaches take, the technical route of I need to learn all of the fundamental skills around exercise and nutrition and understanding research and metabolism and biochemistry. And as long as I understand that stuff and the implications of calorie intake and expenditure, well, then I will be a great coach and I'll be able to help people get great results. And of course, what we realize, some of us takes longer than others, but what we realize, and people are very much realizing for themselves at this point, is that it's much more complex, as you're alluding to. It's much more behaviorally driven, much more habit driven, much more mindset driven, as you said, adaptive and individualized than it really is reflected in the research or in studies or in the quote unquote evidence-based community. And so that's part of what I really appreciate about your approach, is because when you have done what we do long enough, invariably you start to have those conversations and you realize very quickly, right, that it's much more complex than there's a reason why. Like, I get that you know what you're supposed to be doing, but what is the underlying reason why you can't do it? Let's talk about that. And what are the limiting factors here so we can overcome those. With you as an individual, obviously you talk about how you had to figure this out on your own. What was it that propelled you into the dieting space or the fitness space, or like why you do what you do in the first place?
Yeah. So I grew up an athlete and played sports my whole life. And it was funny because when I was growing up, there was a lot around me in my home environment that I was exposed to in the quote unquote diet industry. My mom was always on a diet. My oldest sister almost lost her life to anorexia. At some point in time, everybody in my immediate family had some form of disordered eating, body image issues, things like that. We've all dealt with it. And I felt like I was the lucky one because I played sports, I was active, I was always relatively lean, and just was like, great, I got dealt an amazing hand. I don't have to worry about this like the rest of my family. Until after college, once organized sports was over, I wasn't as active, but I had picked up some typical college kid habits that continued on. I was drinking way too much and eating way too much. And what felt like overnight, I found myself unrecognizable. It was like looking in the mirror and not knowing who was looking back. And because I had ingrained so much of my identity in being an athlete, it was a total, like, just identity shattering moment of, I can't go see friends because they're going to say, what the hell happened to you? I can't see family members that I haven't seen in a while. I can't step on a basketball court or a tennis court because I'm embarrassed by what can I do physically now that I'm this overweight. And at that point, I was even afraid to step on the scale. When I finally did, it was like 250 pounds. And I had been, 170, 180 my whole life, as an adult. So that was the moment of like, I need to fix this immediately. And by fix it, it was, let me just do what I think I have to do, which is starve myself. And I was very susceptible to the marketing of the diet industry. That was what I was exposed to as a kid. So
were you already like personal training or anything, or what were you?
Not at all. I had no exposure to the only thing that I had exposure to was sports. I had no idea about strength training and building muscle. I had no idea about macros or any of that stuff. Never heard calories in, calories out. I was completely new. All I knew was that I probably needed to stop eating so much and I probably needed to be more active. So I started doing hours of cardio, and I bought this cardio machine that, like, to give you some insight into how naive I was. I'm watching this commercial on TV,
and Gazelle.
It was actually called a tread climber. And we're like, we've combined the science of the treadmill with the stair climber to 17x your calorie burn in half the time. And they make this big, bold promise about how many calories you're going to burn. I'm like, oh my God, I need that. So I buy this equipment, and when I got it, there was this little manual, and the last page of the manual had a meal plan. It was like, if you're going to do the tread climber for an hour a day, this is what we recommend eating. And it could not have been more than 1,200 calories. And that's probably generous. It may have been less, but I followed it like to a T. And in the manual, they're like, drink ice cold water all day long to increase your metabolic burn. So you're going to burn even more calories. It was just like all of this craziness. And I lost a lot of weight very quickly. And then I gained it all back. And that just started the cycle of chronic dieting. And the thing that changed everything for me was finding strength training. I moved to a new city, a new town in the same area outside of Philadelphia. And I just got a Groupon for a personal training session. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I walked in the first day, totally intimidated. I look in the door, and there's like these two really fit people that are like stretching, and they clearly know what they're doing. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't belong here. I almost walked away. And I walked in, and the first thing that the owner, who was running like it was kind of like an intro, like get to know what we do here type of class. He's like, for those of you that have been trying to lose weight, you've probably been going about this all wrong. You're probably doing too much cardio, and what you need to do is build some muscle. And it was like, if you want to look better naked, and he like started saying all the things that I wanted. And I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. Fell in love with strength training. And he was actually the person that, as I went through my own transformation, which by the way, there was many years after that where I was still struggling with the nutrition side of things, under eating while I was doing, but I loved the component of strength training where I could see myself progressing outside of just the scale, going in and lifting heavier weights than the week before and things like that. I had a lot to figure out on the nutrition side, but I was so invested in the strength training and muscle building process. Even as I was missing the nutrition piece, it was enough to keep me going and showing up and knowing that I'm going to figure this out eventually. And he was the one that offered me a job to start personal training. And that was how I originally got into the space. But I realized that there were so many people there that were like myself, where they're showing up to the gym every single day, but they're not making the changes that they want because the nutrition side was holding them back. And that was when I made the transition. I was like, okay, I'm more passionate about nutrition than I am training. So I kind of made the pivot and became a nutrition coach, started working for another company, realized that they were very technical in their approach, and everybody just got a cookie cutter plan, and they were not very successful in creating results. And I was not okay with that. And when I started communicating with clients and we actually got to know each other as individuals and as humans, I created more transformations than anybody else there. And I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. It's not so much about the physiology. It's more about the psychology. And that kind of launched me into what I do today.
So how did you evolve your coaching business based on the fact that you started training and coaching through more of the psychological component than the obviously the physiological?
Yeah. So my first exposure to nutrition coaching was literally just write a macro plan. And if somebody doesn't follow it, like they're the problem, and just tell them to do better. And I had access to thousands of data points to show that it just wasn't effective. And telling somebody to be more consistent is like pretty obvious. They already know that. Like they don't need somebody else to tell them like, hey, you need to be more consistent. It's like, great. If it were that easy, then everybody would do it. And so the evolution for me was it's so much more than just what are you eating? It's what are your thoughts around food, and why do you feel like you have to be restrictive, and why are we trying to change everything all at once? Like that was another thing that was very apparent when clients would come to us. It was like, well, I don't know if this is the right time for me because I don't have the time to do 17 different things at once. It's like, hold up, let's take a step back. Why do you think that you need to do 17 things at once? And how has that worked out for you in the past? And we can start to unpack some of those pre-existing beliefs about what this actually entails, and what is the life that you want? What is the future that you want? What is the outcome that you truly desire? And once you get to the core reason for all of this, it's like, you know what? we're starting with way too many things. Let's just start with walking more and get you feeling really good about doing one thing effectively. And what happens is all of a sudden the expectation is like the weight is lifted off their shoulder. And it's like, yeah, I can do that. Great. Like, let's do that this week. And then the next week. So the answer to the question, it became so much more about less about macros. We can still use macros as a tool. And I always say that, like, macros aren't going anywhere. It's a tool that's available, but we need to lay the foundation first. And we need to instill some habits that you can do forever. And we also need to kind of rewire your brain so you stop thinking you have to be perfect. So you stop thinking you have to do 100 things all at once. So you stop beating yourself up every time you make a mistake. And these are the things that we actually have to get through so that when you do utilize the tool of macros, it's coming from a sustainable place. It's coming from a healthy relationship with food. And you're not looking at the numbers as the end all be all. You're not married to the numbers. You're not obsessed with the numbers. You're actually using a tool the way that it's intended to, just like any tool. You know, if I want to use a hammer, it's quite effective for driving a nail into some wood. But if I want to use a hammer to like screw in a screw, it's pretty ineffective. Any tool that you're utilizing can be used for good or for bad. So let's make sure that we're implementing the tool in the right way. And there's a lot more that we have. It was just, let's assess each individual as an individual, and then meet them where they're at and gradually walk them through the process of making the change that they desire.
What I'm hearing is obviously that there's a lot of different ways that we can help clients get the results that they want. And I think that conventional wisdom would lend itself to make us believe that you have to do it one specific way. I have to try this way. I have to try this calorie restrictive process. I have to try, well, that didn't work for me, so I should try this other completely different calorie restrictive or calorie expenditure, whether exercise or nutrition or supplementation or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that any of those are wrong. They probably could have a place, and I'll just be generous in saying that they could have a place at some time for the right person at the right time. But invariably, what it's really coming down to is understanding the individual, understanding what their goals are, understanding what their readiness for change is, what their lifestyle looks like, what what they can realistically commit to, and then starting there. Is that fair?
100%. And a lot of times people don't like to hear that because thinking that there is a way, like a quote unquote one way, the way, the secret, what am I missing? What's the one ingredient? That's a lot easier to wrap your head around than it is to say, you know what, you're actually going to be a part of the solution. And this is the difference. It's a very subtle difference in the frame for the individual, because if I tell you, like, there's this way of doing things that works for everybody, and let's just say we had it, okay? There's this way that works for everybody, and we're just going to hand you the playbook. I'm going to give you this playbook, and you're just going to execute. If it doesn't work, right? Let's say the client is like insanely consistent, and they're just following this playbook to a T. If it doesn't work, guess whose fault it is? It's the coach, because the client just followed the rules. They just went by, like I've done things, where you see all these programs out there now, like, 75 hard and whole 30 and all these things where there's a very clear rule book. And if I follow the rules and it doesn't work for me, well, now I'm abdicating responsibility onto this other source. Like, hey, it's your fault. I did what I was supposed to do, but I don't have the results that I was promised. So you're the problem. And it puts people in a place of not taking ownership.
Totally.
So the way that we're talking about it in terms of everybody's different, and we're going to meet somebody where they're at, and they're actually going to be a part of the solution. That is uncomfortable because it takes extreme ownership to say it's a collaborative effort. We're asking you to modify your behavior over we're not asking you to follow the rules for 30 days. We're not asking you to do something for 75 days. We're asking you to change your behavior over the rest of your life. We're asking you to modify your habits and your routines and your thoughts and how you regulate emotions and all of these different things that require you to be a part of the solution. And it comes from a place of taking ownership and realizing that if I want this change, I have to be a part of the solution. And that can be scary for some people to realize that if it doesn't work, I don't have any fingers to point, because there is no quote unquote like plan, right? Like it should change with the individual. It should
That's right.
adapt with the individual. It should evolve with the individual. So there's no like, well, now I can point the finger if this doesn't work.
Right.
It's I'm the one that's responsible for my own results and outcomes. And that can be a really uncomfortable place to be.
It's almost like helping them acknowledge that there really are no rules when it comes to it. And that is very uncomfortable for people to understand, but I think it's very necessary. And what you probably are seeing, as well as I'm seeing consistently, is that I think people are ready to and ready and willing to acknowledge that they need to finally take ownership over their results, because they've tried so many of these things, these rule-based systems, if you will, previously, with no return on investment. And I know that was the route that you went. At what point in your turbulent, journey of yo-yo dieting and exercise and all of that stuff did you really kind of have the epiphany? And frankly, how long did you struggle with that? And do you still struggle with that to any degree on a daily basis?
Yeah. So there's a few good questions in there. And I wanted to point out something that you mentioned earlier in the podcast where you said, we all figure this out at our own pace. And I was a slower learner because I kept repeating the same mistakes over and over again, thinking that I could shortcut the process. And there had to be something I was missing. And I would look for other people to give me that answer. And if they didn't, then I would place blame. It was their fault. I would never, take ownership. I would play the victim. And there's a concept called Cartman's drama triangle, where you have three roles that take place in the triangle. And it's a psychology concept that explains a lot when you understand it. But there's the victim role, there's the villain, and there's the rescuer. And in order for the triangle to exist, all three roles need to be present. And a lot of times we victimize ourselves, and then we point fingers at somebody else who did something wrong. Like, you gave me this plan, it didn't work. You're the bad guy. So now we've got the victim and the villain. And then we look for the rescuer to come in and save us. Who's our savior going to be? Which is typically the next diet. Oh, this must be the savior that I'm looking for. And then they become the villain because it didn't work. So we point the finger at them and we look for the next person. So for me, it was close to a decade of struggle. And I would say, to answer the question of are there things that I still struggle with, any coach out there, anybody that you follow, anybody that you're consuming content from or that you view as an authority, if they appear to have it all figured out, they're full of shit. I apologize
100%.
if I'm not allowed to curse on here.
You're good. 100%.
That is my feeling. There are 100% things that I still struggle with today. I still invest a lot of time and money in my own growth and development. I still have a coach that handles my nutrition, that handles my training. I still have a coach for business. I still have a coach for personal development. I'm in therapy to better myself. Like, there are a lot of things that I know I can do better. And that's always going to be a work in progress. I'm never going to be a finished product. On the nutrition side in particular, the turning point for me was just one of those things where I had reached such a dark place in hating myself. Even at my leanest, I went from 250, which was probably even heavier because I hadn't stepped on the scale for a while after I'd started exercising. So it was probably more like 260 at my heaviest, down to 165 at my lightest. And I hated my body at 165. I picked it apart. I looked at myself in the mirror. I couldn't stand what I was looking at. I had this ideal that I was this standard that I was supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to meet. And it was never going to be good enough. And what I started to recognize about myself was my obsessive tendencies, where originally my goal was just get below 200 pounds. I would achieve it, and then I would push the goalpost back, which a lot of people do. I'll be happy when I'm X weight, you get to that weight, nothing changes because you haven't actually figured out why this is important to you. You've just attached an arbitrary number to a goal, and you're like, okay, I got there, but my life is still the same, and it didn't fix anything. Maybe it's 10 more pounds. That's what I was missing. So I played that game. It was 200, then it was 190 and 180 and 170. It was never going to be good enough. And I developed such a poor relationship with food I was such a perfectionist. I was obsessed with hitting my macros to the gram that I was missing out on life. And I was creating a divide. And I was married at the time. I'm since divorced. And that was a big wedge in our relationship, was my obsessiveness with achieving whatever it was that I thought I was trying to achieve. And becoming so obsessed with food and not wanting to go out and be social and thinking if I do that, I'm sabotaging all of my results. So I spent, weekends telling friends that I was sick and I couldn't go out with them, skipping family events. I'm very close with my family and I would miss out because, God forbid, I don't hit my macros perfectly. And right. It was just reaching kind of the rock bottom. And then looking back at all the stuff I had tried and realizing it was just a different version of the same thing. Every program had a list of rules and it was restrictive and it was unsustainable. And that was kind of the turning point for me, was like, there has to be a better way that allows me to still be a human. And I felt like I really lost myself in that process. So it was just kind of a wake up call in realizing I don't want to live like this anymore. And I know that I'm smart enough to figure this out, even though it had been probably close to 10 years that I had struggled. And I just started researching for myself. I started learning more about human metabolism and how our bodies work and fueling appropriately and what it actually takes to build muscle and recover and all of the inputs and outputs of stress and what that does to our bodies. And it started to create some light bulb moments of, okay, now I understand why I had no energy and why my hunger signals were all out of whack and why my mood was terrible and my digestion was terrible. All of these things started to make sense from a physiological standpoint. And then I started working with a coach. One of my first coaches was Christian Thibodeau, who was amazingly generous. I got on Skype with him before I even hired him. We spent 2 hours on Skype just talking. And he was the first person that was like, have you ever considered that you're trying to work against your nature and the way that you're wired instead of working with it? And we had this whole long conversation about my personality. We didn't talk about training. We didn't talk about nutrition. We just talked about me as a human being and as a dynamic, unique individual. And it was like, that truly changed my results when I started working with him. It was like 12 weeks. My body changed more than it did in the previous, probably 10 years. So I was convinced that if I could take what I was learning about how to assess an individual and create an adaptive solution for each person, that the results would match. And that has been the case.
And that was the impetus for your personality-based coaching model?
It was, yeah. That was like, it led me down this rabbit hole of personality psychology, positive psychology, human behavior. Of course, you mentioned wanting to know about the technical side. You have to know the technical side as well. Sure. Anybody who's an effective coach will be really proficient at technical and adaptive solutions, but they'll take a technical solution and also make it an adaptive one. An example is like, if I, go to the doctor and I get diagnosed with cancer, and I don't know why I keep using such morose examples, but I get diagnosed with cancer. There's the technical solution that the oncologist should give me, but they should also tell me, like, are we getting our affairs in order? And how do you have this conversation with your family? Those are things that you can't just prescribe. That's adaptive and individual based. So even the technical solution should be included with an adaptive solution. Sure. So we can give a client the technical solution for losing weight. It's actually pretty simple. The adaptive solution has to be attached to it, so we know it's going to work for this individual. And that's
absolutely.
And that's really, like, I just became obsessed with understanding that part of the equation.
One of the things that I think about with that is because we have somewhat of a similar approach, but one of the conversations I have with clients and certainly our coaches a lot in terms of the coaching process is around, we really do leverage our coaching process around data-driven, making informed decisions around data, right? It is a science-based process at the end of the day. However, the nuance of that is it's very, very individual. And so a lot of the ways that we interpret the data has to lend itself to reading between the lines and understanding if and when someone isn't being consistent, what is it telling us and what is the conversation need to be around why? Because everyone has the tools to be able to do the technical aspects. Like, that's not the hard part. The hard part is figuring out in this crazy life that we're living, okay, perhaps the prescription was unrealistic, or it's just simply not realistic for them at that given time under the given circumstances. And so that's where, meeting them where they are and having that actual conversation around, okay, well, what needs to happen around these behaviors, and being able to, help them refine the process, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I think that data should be used in all areas of life because it is very informative. Now, there's the caveat to that, which is data that helps to inform decisions and behaviors is quite useful. Data for the sake of data can be a distraction. There's these people that call themselves data driven, or they love, and I consider myself very data driven, but I have found myself at times in my life where I was just tracking things just to track them, and it didn't actually inform my behaviors or decisions. So it was wasted time and energy that really wasn't helping me. And, a lot of times we get caught up in thinking we're being productive. Like, it's the classic, well, I'm really busy because I'm gathering all this data. But if you're not actually using the data to inform your behaviors and decisions, then it's probably a waste of time. So that's where the balance comes into play is, are we actually using the data to inform our behaviors? If yes, amazing, because that can help us to make more logical decisions and conclusions versus emotional ones, or trying to go in with a preconceived notion and then using data to like fit what you already believe or assume, instead of the scientific approach, like you mentioned, which is, I have a hypothesis, but I'm open to any answer being correct. Like, there's not just one way. I'm open to endless possibilities, and I'm going to use data to help determine which path we should try. And if that doesn't work, we're going to, use the data to make another, hypotheses, and we're going to start that process over again until we find what works for that individual.
Yeah, that's exactly it, is leveraging data. And at the end of the day, most important is really just being able to leverage it to track progress. And say, listen, there's subjective data too. It doesn't just have to be hard numbers on the scale, or net calorie intake is like, listen, or circumference measurements is, of course, subjectively. And that's when we talk about metabolism and biofeedback and things like hunger and energy and cravings and mood. It's like, hey, it's been 12 weeks. The scale hasn't budged, but I fucking feel amazing, and I'm sleeping better, and I have more energy, and, my libido's back, and I'm hungry again, and all of these things. So I think that's really important too for people to understand, is that we do have to have some outcomes that we're shooting for, but it's more about, okay, how are we facilitating those outcomes in a way that works best for you? I think we're saying the same thing over and over again here.
It comes full circle to something that we alluded to earlier, which is not changing everything all at once. Because if you start to see all of these positive trends, but you've manipulated 5 different inputs at once, well, what actually caused that change? We have no idea. We're just guessing. We're like, well, we changed everything. We have no idea what worked and what, may have been a waste of time. And that's where taking the approach of let's focus on the one thing that you can confidently do this week, and really get comfortable with that before we make any other changes. And then we know we can tease out, like, this made a huge difference. And I'm a big believer in the minimum effective dose. And so my feeling is that if we can get the same outcome with less effort and less time invested, that's a win. So, if my like maximum muscle growth potential could be accomplished with 3 days per week of training, sign me up for that. Like, I'll take the minimum effective dose versus having to, go 7 days a week. That's too much. I don't want to do that. So I think that we should be looking for the minimum effective dose in really all areas of our life. Now, that doesn't mean that we want to be lazy or just coast, but we should know what that looks like. And then there's going to be some areas where we want to give more. We want to focus more of our attention. Maybe it's, my relationship is really struggling right now. And so that's going to take away some time and energy from my fitness or from my nutrition. But I know what my minimum effective dose is with my fitness and nutrition. So I can put more energy and emphasis on my relationship right now while I execute the minimum effective dose in this other area of my life. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, to me, it makes perfect sense. And I'm a strong proponent of less is more. because I'm 43, and at this point in my life, and having done this for so long now, is I don't want to fucking have to do more than I need to do, right? And there's too many other things, and you understand this as a business owner and parent, and there's just too many other things to do, and I think this is exactly what our clients and our listeners need to hear is trying to counter the conventional wisdom around having to do everything. And I just did a webinar on this a couple of days ago, but basically the understanding and using science to back this up is we know very clearly that exercise is not a good weight loss tool. As an example, like clearly in the research is you go out for a run and you burn 500 calories, like you do that every day, you don't lose a pound of scale weight. Your body has these compensatory mechanisms that contribute to putting those calories back in one way or another, or minimizing them going back out. And so just simply these concepts, I think, are so important for people to understand that so much of it really is driven in what can we realistically commit to on a daily basis. That's going to help you move the needle. But more so is like, how do we get you to ingrain this process into your lifestyle and stop looking at it as an all or nothing approach? And I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this on Monday. This is going to be a 3-month program. That way I'll be ready for summer vacation and then I'll be there, right? Instead of truly the hard conversations around helping the client develop the autonomy, becoming taking extreme ownership over the process, but also and it sounds cliche and cheesy, but really helping them fall in love with the process, because ultimately it's the only way that they're going to make long-term change, to start to appreciate the daily walks, how to really start to fall in love with the strength training process, that they're going to be able to and want to start to eat healthier foods and manage their calorie intake because they know it makes them feel good, and stop drinking so much at night because they sleep better and then have more energy, and this perpetual cycle.
Totally. And I think there's 2 things as you were talking that really stood out. Is number one, if you have a plan that requires you to be at your best every day, it's a terrible plan. Your plan should allow you to be at your average and still make progress and still feel good about what you're doing. It's not realistic to beat your best. It's like going to the gym and trying to PR every single lift. You would never expect that, but yet we kind of set that expectation a lot of times when we join these programs that are they inundate us with all of these rules and things we have to follow, and we're just required to be perfect in our execution. We just expect that we're going to beat our best all the time. It's a terrible plan to follow. And the other thing is eliminating the finish line and realizing that there is no end date to this. And that can sometimes feel overwhelming, but it can also feel very liberating if you realize there's actually no rush. And if I stop putting so much pressure on myself to figure this all out right now, then I can give myself more grace when I do make a poor decision. You mentioned I drank too much and then I woke up and I felt really shitty the next day. And maybe I want to gradually move out of that and not use alcohol as a coping mechanism, or not use that as the only means of winding down like we've become so accustomed to doing. And that can be a slow process, and it's okay, because if I know that there's no end date and I know there's no finish line, I'm just trying to gradually get better over time. And I'm not putting so much pressure on myself to have it completed by X date. Well, I can give myself grace when I get hammered one night and I'm like, you know what? It happened. I had a great time. I'm just going to, chalk it up and move on. And there's not as much pressure and shame built around that when you can remove the need for a finish line and an end date. So I really think you're right. Those conversations need to be had. And, it's just, sometimes it's one of those things where you have to learn from experience, and you have to look at hindsight as a great lesson to say, you know what, if this other way was going to work, it probably would have worked by now. And that was the realization that I had to come to personally. Like, if this whole restrictive, chronic dieting cycle, if this was going to be effective, I would hope that over a 10-year period, it would have already worked. And since that's not the case, I probably need to find a different approach.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about really acknowledging that we all struggle with, we all have our own issues, especially those of us that are in this space. Like usually coaches do what they do because they've had to overcome their own issues. Right. And that's certainly been your case. That's certainly been my case. And so certainly, and especially when your identity is tied to, like, especially for us fitness coaches, when your identity is tied to you looking a certain way, like that can be very, very challenging for you to drift at any capacity away from who it is that you think you are or should be. But why this, I think, matters for people to hear, one is that, of course, we experience the same challenges that you do as a listener. But two is that we have to take and be proactive about the process. And one of the things you mentioned is that you have had and still have coaches in all of these various elements of your life, which I want to acknowledge and applaud you for, because I do too. I have a nutrition coach. I have a coach who writes my training programs. I have a business coach. I'm in a men's group for fathers and business owners and husbands that, just trying to get better. And one of the things that we talk about, especially when it comes to, especially at this juncture, like if you're listening and you've tried all of these things, right? All of these technical routes to try and get results. At what point do you acknowledge that it's not about how you get there? It's really about who you're surrounding yourself with. Who are you turning to help you walk the path to quote unquote success, to the change that you're looking for? Who has been there before that can help you navigate that journey? And I think for us, we very clearly acknowledge that, sure, we could watch YouTube videos and perhaps figure out how to continue growing our business on our own, or right, how to build a supplement company. But it just makes a lot more sense for our time to be more efficient, to save energy, and to do it in the right way, to just go to the person who's been there before and knows how to do it. And that's certainly something that I would challenge our listeners with around, what if you actually just acknowledge that it's not about how you're going to do it, but rather who you're going to invest in to help you get there? I would love for you, Mike, to comment on the value that you find in the coaching process and, why that, might be relevant.
You just unlocked one of the only shortcuts to my knowledge of actually making the process quicker. Everybody wants the shortcut. They're like, let me, how can I rip the Band-Aid off? How can I make this happen quicker? And the irony to all of that is playing the long game is actually playing the short game, because the more you try to shortcut the process, the longer it takes in the end. So right. The long game actually is the shortcut. But exactly. You just got something that is truly, if I had to say, one of the only shortcuts that actually exists, which is, if you want to get better at managing your money, hang around with people who already manage their money well. If you want to get better at, your mindset around fitness and nutrition, hang out around people who already have been there and have done that, or are on the same path that you're on. Put yourself in that environment, surrounding yourself with people. And the environment isn't just people, but it's also what you're consuming, what you're listening to, who you're allowing to enter your brain space. All of that is part of your environment. Yes, there's the physical environment, but there's also accounts that you're following on Instagram that you would probably be better off not following. Mm-hmm. There's things that you're reading that you'd probably be better off not reading. But it's really, truly fostering your environment, which you have control over, and cultivating the environment that allows you to really shortcut the process. People and who you're investing in and who you're on the journey with absolutely is one of the shortcuts that you can take. I always say, if I'm in a room, like I mentioned a personal development program that I'm in, everybody that's in, there's like 30 of us in this group. And I'm fairly confident that everybody in that group makes more money than I do, which is the exact group that I want to be in. Like, if I want to level up as a human, I want to be around people who are doing it better than I am. And we're all on the same path together. So it's the conversations that we're having in that group. It's just a higher level of conversation. It's a very vulnerable space. It's very authentic. It's all of these things that I value, that I really want to be that example. I want to live that life. I look at the future me and I'm like, the future me will thank me currently for going through this process now. And there's an amazing book called Be Your Future Self Now by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And I highly recommend everybody read that, because it helps you to understand and get very familiar with that future version of you and the decisions that person will make. And how can you get so close and comfortable and intimate with that person that you make decisions in the moment that benefit that future you? And there's an example in the book of, like, I think it was Seinfeld was on a show once, and he was doing an interview, and he was beautifully describing this kind of dynamic that we live in modern day, where it's like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to go out and get drunk tonight, even though I have a 6 a.m. meeting, but that's morning me's problem. That's not my problem. That's morning me. Right. And so we're pushing it off to this future version of us that we're like, he'll deal with that. I don't have to deal with that. And that's one of the problems that we face, is like, no, we actually want to take care of that future version of us. And in the book, really, it comes from a perspective of positive psychology, which is an area that I've researched a lot lately, over the past probably 5-6 years. And it's looking at, how do we actually, like, most of psychology has focused on negative feelings and depression and anxiety. And it's an important field of research, of course, but it kind of ignored how do we learn from people that are happy and are thriving and have this, like, amazing quality of life, and what can we take away from that? And one of the things in the book that the author talks about is being connected with that future version of you, and knowing that I can make decisions now to delay that gratification, because future me in 5 years is going to really benefit from what I'm doing today. And that's part of that investment. Is a lot of times we think of the immediate investment of, oh my God, I have to pay this money to this coach. I have to make this investment in this group or this community or this mentor, recognizing that it might be a short-term, quote unquote cost, even though I would argue that the return on the investment is well worth it. But even if we just look at it as a cost, what's that going to do for you in 5 years? And how is that going to, the future you, that version of you that you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, think about what you're doing for that person, and really get to know that individual. And all of a sudden that decision becomes very apparent, and it's no longer an expense, and it's an investment in the future version of yourself. So, I mean, I could go on for days about this topic, because I'm very passionate about it, but I think you mentioned it. And I really believe that, who you surround yourself with, who you invest in, who you're on this journey with, it's one of the only shortcuts that actually exists.
We're obviously on the same page, and I think we very clearly illustrated the point that we're getting across here. And so I guess it begs the question for those of you that are listening, is understanding the route that you've been on up to this point, what it is specifically that you feel like you're still struggling with, and ultimately identifying if you want to stay, going down the technical route, or you're ready to just simply identify who it is that's going to help you get where you want to go, because you clearly understand now, especially if you're listening to this show, you clearly understand that it is about the process. It's about the long-term journey, which ultimately is going to be the short-term fix. And so once you've identified that, then it's just a matter of who's going to help you get there. And that's the beautiful thing about how and why I get to do this. And I have the opportunity and privilege to interview amazing, knowledgeable, inspirational people like Mike every single week, is you can choose anyone that you resonate with, because there's so many ways for us to help you. It's just a matter of who you want to truly commit to, and then just do it. That is my biggest ask of you. And so perhaps that's Mike Millner. Mike, if they want to find out more about you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, the best place to connect with me is probably on Instagram. The handle is @coach_Mike_Millner. If anybody wants to listen to my podcast, it's called mind over macros. And those are probably the two best ways to stay connected. Either one is perfect.
Amazing. Well, you guys know we'll have those links in the show notes. So make sure you follow Coach Mike Millner there. His podcast is brilliant. His Instagram page has awesome content, and his emails are fantastic. So you definitely want to get on his email list as well. Mike, any parting words, man?
Yeah. So I really appreciate the conversation. This has been a lot of fun. One of the things that you mentioned was, make a decision, decide who you want to work with, or the fact that what you've been doing up to this point hasn't really gotten you to where you want to be. So you probably have to just make the decision and go. And I don't want to just gloss over that because it seems obvious, but it's also a sticking point for a lot of people. And what I always say is really you have two choices in these scenarios. One thing that we know is that living with incongruence, where you're out of alignment with what you say you want and what your actions say you want. So my espoused values are not matching my real life in action values. That creates internal struggle and anxiety and depression, and has a lot of negative consequences. So we don't want it. We want to close that gap, right? We want to, what we say our espoused values are, we want to live them in practice. So if that's not happening, if you say, I want sustainable results, I want this lifelong solution, I want to do this the right way, I want to feel better, I want to be more confident and achieve these results, but in execution, it's not happening. You really have two choices. You can change your actions to align with your words, or you can change your words to align with your actions. And that's really it. If you change your actions to align with your words, that might look like investing in a coach and making the changes that we're talking about. Or you can say, you know what, I'm just not willing to do that. I'm going to stay the same. That's also a valid choice. There's nothing wrong with that, saying it's just not that important to me. So I'm going to change my actions to, I'm either going to change my actions to align with my words, or I'm going to change my words to align with my actions, and just be honest with myself and say, you know what, it's not a priority for me. I'm okay with that it's not a priority, and I'm not going to make this change. But if I don't make this change, then I have to just accept where I am currently. Mm-hmm. And the point here is just decide. There's a great quote that I read the other day that said, the road of life is paved with flattened squirrels who couldn't make a decision. So indecision is not a great decision. Just, pick a lane and roll with it and be okay with it. And I know that's sometimes easier said than done, but hopefully that gives somebody just kind of that little nudge that you need to just make a decision one way or the other.
Brilliant. I appreciate that, brother. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you everyone for listening. And Mike, we'll catch up again soon. For everyone else, we will catch you guys next week. Take care.